Good evening, everyone. We'll have a minute or so if everyone can take their seats. This is a really great turnout. You never know what's going to happen on a cold Wednesday night in January. So thank you for coming this evening. My name is Scott Jones. I'm the South Hill Neighborhood Association president. We do have a joint meeting tonight for the first time in my tenure where we've invited other neighbors. Of course, all neighbors are invited to all neighborhood meetings. But this one specifically, we sent out special invites to South Neighborhood, Edgemore, Fairhaven, Happy Valley, and of course, South Hill. If you are from South Neighborhood, could you raise your hand? And if you're on the board of that organization, would you stand up? Thank you for being here tonight. How about Edgemore? If you are from Edgemore, raise your hand. And if you are on their board, would you stand up? Thank you for coming. Or if you just want to stand up, you're welcome to do that too. How about Fairhaven? Wonderful. Thank you for being here. Happy Valley? Thank you for being here. And Silver Beach, I believe we also had an invite out to them. Thank you, Carrie, for being here. And I probably can glean that the rest of us are from South Hill. So thank you for being here too. I'd like to also recognize our elected officials here tonight. Lisa Anderson represents the 5th Ward, which is in South Hill, Seahome, Puget, Happy Valley, and the University and York districts. And Michael Lilliquist, who represents the 6th Ward, representing the southernmost section of South Hill, Fairhaven, Happy Valley, Edgemore, South, and Samish neighborhoods. Thank you for being here tonight also. All right. On the agenda this evening, we'll have Mayor Lund for the first hour. And then after that, she will have to leave and we'll have kind of a roundtable of questions and concerns that the neighborhoods can bring forth, and we can hopefully combine all those ideas and recognize what's happening in this part of Bellingham and see what we can do about it. If there are any issues that we need to organize ourselves or take to the city. And then after that, the South Hill neighborhood will have their annual meeting. We'll real quickly have an election, and I'm sure it will be very contested. So we'll do that at the end. So South Hill, please do stay, and anyone, of course, is happy to, you're welcome to stay also. So with that, I would like to introduce Mayor Kim Lund. It was hard to get her here. We've tried a couple times, but we really appreciate her time. And I do have an agenda tonight, switching through quite a few topics. I'm going to keep it a closed floor so that we can stay high level and we don't get into the weeds of any one specific issue. I do have sheets of paper here that you're welcome to write down a question and bring that over to me. If it is a topic that is pertaining to tonight, I will ask it. And if it's not, I will follow up with the city and get an answer to you. So please put your email on this. Regarding emails also, there is a sign-up sheet in the back. It's only for if you would like to get contact information about South Hill neighborhood meetings. That's the only reason for that sign-up sheet. You don't have to be a South Hill neighbor or resident to be on that mailing list. So please sign up if you would like to know more about the meetings. With that, Mayor Kim Lund.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. I'm really glad that Scott spent time asking people to identify which neighborhoods they reside in, because when Scott reached out and we were coordinating for this, I put the invitation out to consider expanding to other Southside neighborhoods. I know we've had conversation at the Mayor's Neighborhood Advisory Group about how do we drive more connections to each other. It's arbitrary where we define a neighborhood on a city map. And there's so much connection through Fairhaven Park, the 100-acre woods, the Fairhaven neighborhood. Those are common spaces in the south part of Bellingham that unite all of us, and we have a shared interest. And so As some neighborhoods are seeing their membership or their engagement dwindle, we saw this as an opportunity to bring everyone together and try and spark some of those connections and beyond just the boundary lines of where our actual neighborhoods are. How do we come together in opportunities like this to be in community together? So really grateful that South Hill was so gracious to extend the invitation to the other neighborhoods tonight. And I just want to say that I am still personally reflecting on the sunset tonight. Did people have a chance to see that? It went on, and it was extraordinary. So it was kind of a special evening headed into tonight. So thank you for joining me in the cold. I did get the agenda, and the first agenda item to me looks, they're pretty distinct topics. Public safety is a big topic, and public works is also its own very big topic. So I'm curious to know a little bit more about what you want me to focus on in the public works piece, but happy to begin with the public safety conversation. And the public health and safety conversation really over the last few months, starting this summer, has centered around some of the impacts that we're experiencing in the community that are connected to illegal encampments on private property. And so this week, the private property owners, there are 5 of them that own 6 parcels that span the Bakerview and Northwest encampment. They took collaborative action this week to begin the cleanup. And that is the outcome of months of conversation and convening that the city did to encourage that collaborative action, because what we were hearing from the community broadly was that we had reached a tipping point of public health and safety concerns. And what that looked like was the Bellingham School District having to relocate a school bus for the safety of school children that lived in the cul-de-sac behind that encampment, and genuine public safety concerns. It's been multiple conversations with the national executives of the Kroger team, talking about the increased impacts on their store employees. They've had 2 assaults, serious assaults. One was a stabbing on a delivery truck driver trying to deliver goods to that store. It has looked like hearing stories from the kindergarten and child care center across the street, and their employees having to navigate an individual wielding a machete when they're taking care of 2- and 3-year-olds. And so when you think about the combined collective impacts, we obviously have primary care and concern for people that are living unsheltered in our community and are unhoused and in those encampments. But the ripple impacts and the total costs of what happens when it goes from just a few individuals who are experiencing houselessness to this kind of number where organized crime understands that they can come in and act with impunity. It is no longer safe for police to respond to a 911 call or for fire or EMS to go into that encampment without a police protection. And so parts of this community can understand where that tipping point is, and they take advantage of that. And so we were seeing human sex trafficking take place within that encampment, organized drug activity taking place inside that encampment, and it becomes a shield. So some of the most vulnerable members of our community become a shield for very serious criminal and organized crime. And so that is and has been part of some of the biggest public health and safety concerns at the city. And we have a weekly interdisciplinary team There's a city team of no fewer than 20 members of legal, police, public works, especially the solid waste team, our health and human services manager, which is a liaison with direct service providers that do outreach in those encampments, and liaisons with the county health department. It's the mayor's office team, it's the planning department, and of course, law enforcement and fire. And so we have our safety professionals and all of this group at the city meeting weekly to talk about where are we going, how are we responding, how are we making sure we're informed, the community's informed, and what comes next. And so what's happening this week at Bakerview in Northwest is the outcome of those conversations, which started in the summer. We did walkthroughs with the county health department team in October, and now we're here. And so we will keep this approach going. We learn a little bit more every time we go. An example of what that learning looks like is when we do the actual tagging before any cleanup activity happens. The public works team that goes and does the tagging on any structures, we're creating a map. And so that map goes to the county health team and to direct service providers. So in that gap between noticing at structures and the actual cleanup activity, everyone knows exactly where a structure was noticed and where there may be an individual or any domestic animals that we want to make sure are taken care of before the cleanup activity occurs. And as a response, the county health department has been able to open up their shelters. The severe weather shelter has been open, and they've been having, I think the last census information that I saw was about 70 guests are saying yes to shelter there right now. And we also have a commitment from the new Lighthouse mission for a surge capacity. So when service providers are going out and doing that notice, they have somewhere to take anyone that says yes to that offer. So we have good partnerships in place right now. So people, if they're seeking supports, we have somewhere to direct them to. So that feels good.
Is there a risk that the encampment's moving elsewhere?
So right now, a lot of the guests that haven't said yes to emergency shelter opportunities have gone to another parcel. A lot of that appears to be located along Maplewood Avenue. And we've had multiple meetings with those property. It's primarily one property owner. So logistically, it's not quite as a complex of a conversation as it was for Bakerview and Northwest, where there are 5 individual property owners or corporate entities that own those parcels. So it's a less complex conversation, but it doesn't mean that it's any less urgent for them or less urgent for the immediate neighbors in that area.
Can you speak a little bit more then about downtown, the homelessness there, control that instance?
So we have brought back our first police specialty unit. We used to have several units in the city of Bellingham, and we had a reduction in our overall numbers at the police department. We've slowly been building back over time, and we are happy to say that we have crossed a threshold where we were able to say yes to the return of a specialty unit. And we prioritized, and the police department advocated for bicycle cops downtown to be the first to return. And so we have coverage downtown 7 days a week right now, from early in the morning to 5 o'clock at night. And I've had the chance to spend time with one of the patrols and do a check-in with them. I've also heard, I had the owners of Stockton Paint leave a very sincere and heartfelt message on my voicemail, thanking. They said they had the most, that their staff and their employees had the least disrupted work week as employees in that business in 5 years since bicycle costs have come down. So there was a deep expression of gratitude about what that has looked like for them and their employees who go to work there every day. So downtown, it feels good right now. And it also feels good that we have more supports for people. We have 2 new Portland loos downtown, so there's much more access to public sanitation options for people who need to use public facilities. That feels really good. The way station has come online. If you're familiar with what the way station is, it is a medical respite for members of the community that are unhoused and are being discharged from Peace Health, so that they have a transition point for care and connections to services after discharge from the hospital. But the other half of the building is dedicated to laundry and hygiene needs for individuals who are unhoused. We used to do some showering 3 days a week behind City Hall. Now there's much more expanded access to showering needs. Laundry care is fantastic there. And there's also a host of street medicine options. People can seek a prescription for medicated alternative treatment if they're struggling with an opioid addiction. They can get connected to a prescription for Suboxone and a safer alternative while they're navigating their journey to recovery. So all of that is downtown right now, and that feels really good.
Amazing stuff. Let's move on to public works. And I think since we're not going to get to every point tonight, let's start with wastewater and maybe get an update on the wastewater treatment plant, if there is an update.
So we have a couple of things that I could touch on as it relates to the Post Point treatment plant. One is that we are in a process. We were noticed by the Northwest Clean Air Agency. Some of you may be familiar that the city was noticed of a violation, and it was for emissions violations around carbon dioxide and some other gases. And so we are in the process of changing how we burn. We're burning at higher temperatures, which burns much more cleanly. And we're making the investments in our furnace stacks to be able to support that process in the short term and the long term. And then we are installing a continuous emissions monitoring system right now at Post Point. It's called a SEMS. So we'll be able to know in real time what our emissions look like and be able to respond accordingly, whether that's a maintenance need or a change in our process. So we have that work playing out right now at the Post Point plant. And then if you follow along closely, there was a presentation to the City Council about some planning that's taking place right now to meet nitrogen nutrient loading from the wastewater effluent that's going into the bay. So we're evaluating different ways that we can reduce the nitrogen load into the bay that's connected to our wastewater effluent. That is an expensive process. I haven't seen what the numbers look like, but we're talking probably 9 figures or and above. So it's not insignificant. So we're looking at what that play out. I would say that there are several municipalities that have sued the Department of Ecology over that standard because of the costs associated with it. The City of Bellingham is not a party in that litigation, but we are watching to see how that might play out. So, and I think that is a worthy goal to reduce our nitrogen loading and because of the impacts that carries. But the annual contribution of nitrogen in Bellingham Bay from Post Point is 20% of the annual load. So 80% of nitrogen loading will still be taking place through the Nooksack River and other point source creeks and other runoff. So it's
think a fair question to ask is what is the cost to reduce the impacts of 20% of the load? And that's the question that some cities are asking, asking the courts to consider as ecology does this works. So we'll see how that plays out. And then part of what we're doing is taking a kind of a one water approach to how we think about water in our community. And what that has looked like is a change from a group, an advisory group that focuses primarily on Lake Whatcom and its unique concerns and needs, and expanded the scope of that advisory group to the newly formed Water Resources Advisory Board. And that board has a broader set of, I think their agenda and their docket has issues that go beyond just the lake. And so we're thinking more broadly about treatments, utilities, and delivery of water, how we do our rate structures. And they're also thinking about how do we handle stormwater runoff and our wastewater. So thinking about water in a more comprehensive systems level view is the intention behind the newly formed and created Water Resources Advisory Board. And that beginning analysis of how do we pay for some of the future changes at Post Point and elsewhere are going to be part of a study that we're undertaking in the city of Bellingham. So that work is happening. Is that helpful?
Very helpful.
Okay. And I would also say, if you have never taken a tour of Post Point, or I see Jan nodding, we did a couple of field trips at the Mayor's Neighborhood Advisory Board. We went both to the water treatment facility, which is located in Whatcom Falls Park, and we also did a tour of the Post Point facility, and it is pretty, I think we often don't think about the scope that is required to deliver what really goes behind what we take for granted when we turn on our tap water and we have some of the cleanest and best tasting water in the nation, and what that entails behind the scenes to have fidelity, to continue to be able to deliver that high quality drinking water, or what it looks like to keep Post Point up and running as the city continues to grow, and what the future of that is. And there's so much pride in that work. So we do have a water week at the city where we open it up for the community to do a tour. Might not be the first thing that comes to mind for a date night is going to the to the Post Point treatment facility, but I would encourage it. It was really interesting to go into the labs, see what it's like, and just see behind the scenes of the care and the pride that the city team puts into delivering those services on behalf of all of you.
A lot of good information. Is my microphone coming through? Okay. So let's change gears over to parking and multimodal for a moment. At first I had them as two different points, but I believe that they are actually interconnected, and that parking, especially with what happened at the city council last week, they took away, I'll let Mayor Lund discuss it more, but we won't have as much parking built with new development. And we already have parking issues downtown. We have the new Holly Street challenges. Some people love it, some people hate it. I've heard of pedestrians feeling less safe than they ever have before. And then we also have the city working on a multimodal project for over many years. And multimodal means multi-modes of transportation, trying to get away from vehicles and getting more in tune with mass transit, bikes, and pedestrians. So could you just speak on whatever you feel is top of mind?
Yeah. You know, I think there was a lot of conversation as the council deliberated. That we have two council members here who were no vote on the decision about parking reform and how should we approach that. 5 other members of the council were had expressed a willingness to be more bold as it comes to parking right now and how the city should be responding in a housing crisis. And it isn't necessarily true that all structures will be built with less parking. It's just that the developer, the homeowner, the person putting an ADU in their backyard, they get to decide what is the right number of parking for their project. So it's parking flexibility, and that's how I see it. And what's that?
Let's go ahead and let her continue. Thank you. I'm not going to open it up to the floor tonight. It's just going to be really difficult to get everyone's questions answered. So let's just see if your question is answered first, and we'll go from there. Okay, Lynn, thank you.
It is true, though, that in the communities that have adopted it, that there likely will be less parking built. That will be the ultimate decision. And we saw this play out in Old Town on a small scale when the council relaxed the parking for that project. It's an 8-block project in the Old Town neighborhood downtown. And it did result in additional units being built. And we've seen that playing out in communities across this country that have adopted this. And we also acknowledge that multimodal transportation plays a really important role in making continued investments in things like our GO lines or exploring bus rapid transit routes in our community are an important element to how this works and the success of having less parking overall. And so there are many things that need to be part of a suite of actions to both address our critical lack of housing stock in our community for the people who live here today, and also for the people that will be coming here. And I know the comprehensive plan is one of the topics of conversation that we have. And so the state has told us, as part of our comprehensive plan, that we need to plan for growth for the next 20 years. And it looks like the city of Bellingham's allocation is going to be at least 18,000 units of housing over the next 20 years, and potentially significantly more, depending on this county's overall approach to how much we want to push into current rural areas versus what should go here. And I'll be very candid and say, I think a lot of the growth should go here, and in particular in downtown or Old Town, it aligns heavily with our climate goals as a county. We want to preserve our agricultural lands. We want to preserve our forestry lands. We as a city want to at least maintain, if not grow, our urban tree canopy and our forests to create a more resilient community. And where we don't have conflicts with landmark trees or other groves of trees of significance is in our downtown. So going up in our downtown is an alignment with our community's climate goals. And it's also of critical importance for the city as we're struggling, and a big part of our budget challenges right now are paying for our safety professionals, our police and our fire, which come out of our general fund. We can look to annexations for urban growth areas in the north, but we know that we're not already meeting our service delivery standards in the Court neighborhood today, in some instances for EMS response. So we're gonna have to invest in new fire stations. We're gonna have to fix the structural budget challenge that's in the general fund that would pay for the firefighters to go in that station. And this is true as the city grows. And so investing in where the infrastructure already exists. Downtown, we don't need another water tower. Growth in the north or the south part of town is dependent on the significant infrastructure investment. It's dependent on new lift stations to get wastewater from new neighborhoods in the community to Forest Point. That's an expensive investment in infrastructure and energy. So the cost to grow in our downtown core is a fraction when it's at the urban developed center as it is when we push out into new neighborhoods. And that is true for the ongoing service delivery costs for a city as we grow. So I'm in favor of prioritizing growth in our downtown, and that is reflected in the housing executive order, where the planning and the design review team was given a really clear hierarchy of how we accelerate and prioritize permits in the city. And so Old Town and Downtown, you'll see within that hierarchy are going first right now as we grow, and for that reason, because it aligns with so many of our needs of the city today.
Could we get back to the parking and multimodal? With all this growth, right now, traffic at some times of day in some areas of the city are horrendous in comparison to how they were when I first came to town. With the Holly Street bike and our focus on pedestrian and mass transit, how do you see them all interplaying with parking and traffic and finding other ways of getting around?
I think it's a matter of perception. As someone who's been driving on these roads since I learned to drive at age 15, I don't feel like it's been a significant or an unexpected shift. When I grew up in this town, there was 30,000 people that were called going down home. We're just shy of 100,000 today. I don't think that my time to navigate this community is 3 times worse than when I was driving when we were 32,000 people when I was 16 years old. So I think it's just, for you, it personally feels like it's a lot of impacts on our traffic. That hasn't been my personal experience. And so I think it's, what is our personal tolerance for what growth looks like and how we get around. I do think this community's given really clear direction. We have a pedestrian and a bicycle master plans open, and we want to see a future for Bellingham where more people are walking. We want more walkable neighborhoods, and we want safe biking options, and we want to prioritize. And in fact, the city has set forth that its pedestrians and bicyclists are the priorities and not the cars. And that is how we're approaching multimodal as we go forward. And as a mother of a 19-year-old and 24-year-olds, especially my 24-year-old just had the chance to go to college in a university town on the East Coast. She did not have a car. She was dependent on public transportation, and she sees how you navigate life without a vehicle. And that's not where we live, but she'll come back to this community with that knowledge. And, other communities have adopted car shares. I think that's a key takeaway from other cities that have tackled parking reform in their communities. If you need to go to a doctor's visit in Seattle, if you want to do a Costco run and you're going to have a trunk full of goods, biking is not an option for you if you're not a car owner. But can you pay for 4 hours of time on a car? Yes, that's a great option that exists in many communities, and I think an important element of how we make this successful moving forward. And also, I would say for a lot of the renters in the community or people that are in homes and are so constrained, housing constrained, and the portion of their income that is going to meet their rent or their mortgage, having less dependence on auto insurance as those rates increase and the cost of owning a car, giving the flexibility for alternatives, I think is part of our calculation about how we move forward at the city. And I think the youngest generation is really expressing that. It's came through in our community feedback, especially at the Western or venture-focused groups, about being less car-centric is important to that group in the community. And you know, I think it's important to listen to those voices right now and, you know, acknowledge them. I have a circular driveway. I have a pull through. A lot of my lots, because of the way we mandated parking for my house in the Edgemore neighborhood, I have a 3-car garage and a pull through circular driveway. I wish I did not have that amount of land allocated for cars on my lot personally. I would like us to have the flexibility to think about how we use our land, which is precious and finite, in new ways as we move forward and in service to the future generations of who will call this place home. And I just would end it with something that's really stayed with me as I've been following the public comment on this matter, and it was a member of the community that said, I would rather have a hard time finding a place to park my car than finding a place to call home. And so I think, to me, that really summarizes part of what the next generation is asking of us as we plan for the future of Bellingham in 2045 and beyond.
Amazing segue. I put a slide up on the projector there. So I'm also a planning commissioner for the city of Bellingham, not acting in that capacity this evening, of course. This is a graph that we received, and it's public on the website, regarding AMI, average median income, across the board in Bellingham, and the housing stock versus the housing supply needed over the next 20 years. The first graph is 0 to 30% AMI. The second one is also, and that's the very poorest of the poor. We have 30 to 50% AMI in the third graph, 50 to 80%, 80 to 100, and 100 to 120. I'm not focusing on above 120 because they're not having any problem finding places to live. What we have here is that we have about a 25% of the total housing need over the next 20 years in what, for a lack of a better term, middle income folks. If we go to the next slide, we have 75% of the need of the lowest AMI. And the challenge gets worse in that they need 150% more of the current stock in the next 20 years, while middle income only need 10%. Middle income is exactly where developers want to build. It's exactly where they can make the most money. Now, when we have a need of 150% more at the lower AMI, the challenge is no one wants to build it. So what you can see here is that the green bar is the families who need housing. The orange bar is the housing that exists. So in the 50% and above, there's plenty of housing stock. There's not a lot of families needing it. But in the lower two graphs, that's where the housing stock is needed. And I'm just putting this information out there. Ms. Lund already knows all of these numbers. But what I'm asking of you is, how do we supply the housing stock for the workforce housing that we need when it's something that will not naturally occur in the market? Right now, there's tons of projects. It seems like a lot of the executive order that you placed is across the board, but we need to focus, I believe, on workforce housing, the poorest of the poor, the folks who cannot find housing at anything that they can afford. What programs, other than us building directly, which is sometimes units of $500,000 a piece, so we need to find market rate housing. How do we do that in the next 20 years for the housing stock of the 150% that is not planned for?
So one of the things in the executive order is, and it's a body of work that's been underway, the city is evaluating what we call a multifamily tax exemption. And really what it is it's tax relief. And we had 2 different programs of tax relief that we put out. And one was just to broadly give tax relief for a limited number of years to stimulate housing, because we acknowledge we have a critical lack of housing supply across the continuum. And that product has been successful. But what we tried to do was add 50% more years to that tax relief to incentivize affordable housing. And we've had that program for 12 years, and we have not created a single unit of affordable housing in 12 years. So clearly, that program is not structured in a way that is efficacious or meeting the intention. So we are going back and looking at how do we restructure that right now. And the idea being to that workforce housing. So from, the 80% of the area median income up to maybe 120 or 100%, how do we incentivize more affordable units? Because our first bite at the apple was unsuccessful. And so we're going to take another look at that, and the executive order calls for that analysis to come forward in the near future.
But the AMI that you just mentioned are the percentages that we don't need supply of. That's where my question comes, and I think a lot of neighbors are concerned about. That's right. It's the 0 to 50% that is horribly lacking. Is there a plan for that?
Well, our plan for that right now is our two sources of money that we receive, both from a state tax and a local property tax levy that supports affordable housing. And we focus that on 80% or below. Often it's 60% and below of AMI. And we dedicated a significant chunk of our pandemic federal response dollars to even doing more to accelerate affordable housing. And so some of those examples that are going forth right now in our community are Millworks Phase 2, the affordable housing project that is kind of commonly known as the motorcycle lot by Bellis Fair. That is going to be turned into an affordable housing project. If you drive into downtown from the south side of town, you'll go past Laurel and Forest. That is affordable housing that we pushed out through those dollars. So the city last year, it was $15 million that we pushed out in affordable housing at that income level you're talking about.
How many units was that?
Do we need more? Yeah. I don't know what the total number would be. I can get back to you on what that is. It's probably in total far less than even 500, I would think. And so that is what the housing crisis is right now, is that number with all of that critical investment, voter support from our community, an allocation of pandemic response dollars. We've done a tremendous job pushing out housing to support that population, and it's far below what the need is in the community. And this is where we get beyond what can one municipality do to meet the housing crisis. This is where we need to have a conversation with our state elected officials, with our federal officials. How do we answer the call to do more to meet that need? Because Bellingham is unique in Whatcom County. When we look at part of this comprehensive plan on the state by income band is mandating that the county as a whole take on all of this. So from emergency shelter to permanent supportive housing to that 0 to 30%, 50, all of those income bands, we as a county need to allocate across the cities. And Bellingham is unique in the county and the cities in our commitment to doing that work and stepping up to do that. But we still fall way short of the resources we need to meet those numbers. And so that's a critical and crucial conversation we need to have with our state and our federal officials.
Well, thank you for doing so much on that. We really appreciate it. Let's move over to the budget. I'm a finance guy. I like looking at dollars. Would you tell us a little bit, you have the sheet there, a little bit about the budget, and this is your first full year's budget as mayor, is that correct?
Yes, this is my first budget. So when I took office, my first year in 2024 was the last year of the biennium that was put forth by the former Mayor Fleetwood and enacted by council. So we were on the second year of that biennium. We have since reverted to an annual budget cycle, and in part that is because, as I'm sure you have heard, there's a story that's echoed across government at the state level right now. We've heard numbers ranging between 12 to 15 billion dollar shortfall in our state budget. There is a budget crisis at the county, at Western Washington University, and in the city's general fund. We are experiencing across the state the impacts of decreases in our business and occupation taxes, our sales taxes, our real estate excise taxes. All of that is having significant slowdowns. And so the pools of money that are dependent on those sources of revenue are seeing significant impacts. And for right now, the city of Bellingham, that is our general fund.
The budget, as it states, and this was new to me, that I look at the budgets from the years past, and then I look at the actuals, and the actual spent was far less than what the budget originally portrayed. And so with that in mind, the budget as it stands today, we have a $313 million reserve, and that goes across all aspects of the city. That's not just money they can spend willy-nilly, and I get that. But at the end of the year in the budget, we're looking at $201 million in reserves, a 36% drop. Now, I know that the city is not going to spend $111 million because we would be bankrupt in 2 years. How does this play out over the next 12 months in the day-to-day?
It's something that from the beginning of the spring through the summer and into the fall, as we were looking at the budget, it was, along with public safety concerns, probably the biggest part of what I spent my time thinking about as the executive and as the departmental leader. And at the city, we didn't just adopt an annual budget cycle. We adopted a shared goal across the city leadership team to enter into this with a commitment to having a completely different approach, a very transparent approach, and what we call a one city philosophy to tackling our budget situation right now. So for the first time ever, rather than each department presenting their budget priorities and their needs individually as a department with members of finance in the mayor's office, and those conversations happening in silos, we all presented. So the library was presenting in front of the chiefs of police and the fire chief, and vice versa. So the entire city team was there and present in the room to really understand what are the scope of needs, what are the priorities, what are the unfunded needs, and then we arrived at the hard decisions about what we were moving forward in this 2025 budget as a group. And not everyone got what they wanted, but there's a shared understanding of the why the budget looks the way it does, and an ability to, even when we say disagree and commit. They're committed to the budget as it is right now, but where we're at is probably having more hard conversations in our future. So one of the things that we did last year as a city was take a fresh look at our financial policies and priorities, and we took a new look at our city's reserve thresholds, and we set some new floors in our reserves. And where we sit today is we are in a critical area of the amount of reserves in the city's general funds. We are what we call in the red zone right now. And so we are likely going to have some more hard conversations about what we're doing, what we can say yes to, and how we're moving forward right now. I think Councilmember Anderson's. Do you want to add to that, Lisa?
No, I don't know if everybody can hear me. I'll try to use my auditorium voice. City Council just decided at our last meeting we're bringing back our Finance Committee, and I'll be chair. So I've been looking at the budget since recently, kind of refamiliarizing myself. So specifically to this, general reserve is going down 6%. That's what Mayor Lund is speaking. We're not going to be able to continuously do that long term. We're going to have to look at if our revenue doesn't come in. We're going to have to look at that general budget expenditure to see where those cuts are. But when you look at things, I was touched on earlier, the wastewater. We have projects in the works for a while, and now some of that money is going to be spent. And so those reserves are going down. We decided not to spend about $1 billion to redo Post Point, but we had deferred maintenance, so some of that maintenance is coming in now, and including some of the work with dealing with some of the contaminants. That's one of the reasons why tiny homes will be moving, is because where they're situated, we're going to start doing some work there. We've been purchasing additional property, and there will be some work coming along in that area. When you look at the 36, there's a couple of topics not on here, and some of that is the roads. I think they've had close to like a 80% increase, and some of that is James Street. We've got James Street, technical part of it, and then the roundabout, that section. So we have some really large projects that is bringing that 36% total, but that has been known for a couple of years that this work is coming. We may not necessarily spend all of it this year, but it's going to be encumbered because of contracts and then spent out. So for me, I'm more concerned about the 6% general, and one of the reasons why we did agree to go into that general reserve is because of public safety. We committed as a city, excuse me, the mayor's office council to hire additional officers, hire an additional person in dispatch, and then catching up some of our contracts, because we didn't have contracts with our emergency services, and those contracts came in finally. We had back pay, so when the contract wasn't activated, so we went back about a year, so we kind of have a bump in there that we had to take care of. But some local, because your B&O taxes really matter, because that money comes right back into the city. So
shop local.
shop local.
If you're thinking of making a major purchase and considering driving down to Skagit County for that major purchase to save 0.1%, I would make you an ask, a plea to reconsider.
Buy your cars local.
Yes, buy your cars local.
Renovations on your house, now the time too, because we love Lowe's and Home Depot for the money that comes back into the city. We hopefully will not have too much decline. Hopefully the numbers will start coming in better in our predictions going forward. One quick thing to know, if you didn't catch it, we've gone to a yearly budget instead of every 2 years, so that we can act a little bit more nimbly, because a lot of times, and that's kind of, I think, reflected in here too with the numbers, is because people had 2 years to spend their money, 1 year not a lot, next year a lot, and so some of this is kind of held over of that 2-year process.
I do want to say, while it feels like there's a lot of concern about the general fund, and those concerns are well-founded, we do have, like we talked about, voters make an investment in an affordable home fund. We have voted to levy that on our property taxes, and that money comes in and it is secure right now. We have agreed as a community that we want to make an investment in our green waste levy. We just renewed that in a new version a year ago. And so those kinds of investments that voters have approved are secure, and those funds are critical to the city right now. And so I'm tremendously grateful to the community's investments in those needs. Where I will say we could be headed, and we'll know a lot more when we get on the other side of this strategic plan that we're going to undertake about fire and police response in this community and how we can better afford those services to meet the needs of growing Bellingham. And so we can potentially, that is almost 60% of our general fund goes to support our police and fire departments right now. And so when we are under constraints, and that is a singularly big part of what those constrained funds look like, we need to better understand what our needs are. We would like to continue to hire more police officers, to bring back more specialty units. And I will say, on the plus side, that we are hitting that number, and while we can't bring back the traffic safety division in full, for the last full week, we had enough numbers on shift that we had a dedicated officer focused on traffic enforcement in the city for the first time in a few years, just this last week. And we will continue to operate that way. That officer will not be going on patrol response calls. They are dedicated to traffic enforcement. So when we can, we're rolling things like that back in when we don't have to do overtime to do it. And we're trying to look at those ways of operating. And it's not a no across the board. We said yes to an additional life safety inspection resource within the fire department this year. That was it's one of those critical positions that we need both as we grow, and also this is a neighborhood and a community that was impacted by the fire at the terminal building. We know what it's like to lose a historic structure and a community gathering place. We want to make sure that we have the resources to do those inspections on our existing buildings and our new buildings as we grow. So, you know, we are saying yes to essential needs, but it's a balancing act right now, and that's the honest reality about where we're at the city. But I am deeply grateful to have the council's involvement and acceptance of staff's recommendation to bring back the finance committee as a standing committee within city council's business, and the planning departments. Sorry, did I say something?
Michael Lilliquist is having a problem with his phone.
Oh, this is all Michael? Just kidding, Michael.
Since we have a stop, I know that you have a hard stop at 8, so I'd have one more question. I'd like to circle back on the parking minimums.
Yes.
I've had a lot of feedback from neighbors, and they were wondering why affordability wasn't connected to the parking minimums. Could you speak to that finally, and then we'll let you go? Thank you.
I think it's the kind of the crux of the question. I think on both sides of the community that we were hearing from on this issue, there's shared agreement that parking reform makes sense right now. But what we, whether we connected that to affordability as we took action to this interim ordinance that was, you know, where there was a difference of opinion. And we did consider, does it make sense just to apply this in our urban villages or within geographic proximity of a GO line right now? Are there approaches that we could take that wouldn't put this across the whole city right now? And the reason why we decided to advance for council's consideration not connecting it to affordability right now is because we are in a crisis, and we wanted council's actions to be commensurate with the crisis that we're in right now. And in part, that crisis looks like after the 2008 recession and the crash in the housing market, the number of homes that we built in our community were less than 100 for several years. And we built back over time, but we have a deficit of thousands of units connected to that 2008, 2009 housing bubble that we never have adjusted for or accounted for the people that are here right now. And that is playing a significant role in the cost of housing, in our low availability for rental units. We have put a lot of pressure on our housing stock locally. And where we're at right now with high interest rates, we probably closed out 2024 at about half of the number of units that we want to be growing. We hit a peak of 1,200 a few years ago in 2022, 23, and we've been dropping by several hundred units. So in a housing crisis, when we're seeing numbers dip back to the 2008, 2009 recession levels, that's terrifying to me. And we started this conversation by talking about the impacts of illegal encampments, and these issues are directly connected. And so for me, because parking is so foundational, when you hear a homeowner talk about how do they approach, how they build a single family residence on a lot, how someone is thinking about if they're going to put an ADU or, kind of a suite to bring their parents in to age in place in their backyard. Parking is foundational to that, and it's certainly foundational to any multifamily project or bigger developments. And it's like doing a puzzle. When you start with the frame and you start there, parking is the frame. And so adding complexity or thinking we were going to get to the right policy choice in the right time didn't seem like the right approach. And parking still will go through, what council enacted is an interim ordinance. It will still play through our regular process. It will still go before our planning commission. It will come back before council. There will be additional public hearing. We will get to see how this plays out, and there's chances for public engagement and reflection and your voices to be heard on this. But taking bold action in a crisis right now, especially when we have a growing number of people that are unhoused, seniors are the fastest growing demographic of members of the community that are unhoused. I want to take away some of the constraints. I want to provide more flexibility to do more to meet the moment. And so that is in part why we didn't connect it to affordability. The other piece is for surface parking. If we take in a price of $25,000 and we take that off the table, say a multifamily unit might go on the market for $500,000, but we want to sell it for $300,000. We need to come up with a delta of $200,000. So that's about 10 parking spaces for one unit to lessen the market rate price from $500,000 to $300,000. So it's not very scalable to get to affordability measures with just parking alone either. And so I think looking at a fresh look at the multifamily tax exemption, which is what failed to deliver any units of affordable housing, makes sense. There are other ways to achieve our affordability goals in this community, and I'm excited for those conversations to play out.
Thank you. Real quick, I've asked for a study to be done for years. Others have also. Is there another study other than just the multifamily tax exemption study to actually look at what will be a solution for affordability?
Well, I know there's a council member in the room and the others that have been talking about inclusionary zoning for a long time. I don't know if we have an official study on that. I've heard staff within the planning department talk about the economics right now and the cost of money and how that doesn't pencil out. I haven't seen that put forth in an official study. And so I don't really know what the economics look like and what interest rates need to be to make that a viable path forward. But I would certainly welcome that analysis. Yeah.
Thank you very much for spending your time with us this evening. We're going to let her go. Thank you very much. I'll take the microphone off. Thank you so much. Residents who have specific concerns,
Okay.
maybe take a look at it. Thank you. You're welcome to stay. And everybody, we're going to stick around for a little bit. We have two things on the agenda that I thought would be kind of fun. The first one, the last one, is the Southwell Neighbors Association election. But since we have neighbors together tonight, I was wondering if we just wanted to go around, if anybody had a concern that may not be being addressed by the neighborhood or the city, something of deep concern, whether it be a danger or something that you would want to have an organization such as a committee get involved with to try to make deeper effects on whatever topic that is. Does anyone have anything like that? We can just do like a roundtable, see if there's something out there that hasn't been spoken about that might come up. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm from South and I was passing out flyers by email. So it's a situation that I learned about not very long ago.
Come on up.
Basically what happened was inadvertently a floodplain was created, 62 houses in a floodplain, homes I should say. Most of them are in Robin Lane Mobile Home Park. And so it happened inadvertently in the early 90s when a fill permit was granted on a piece of property that spans the little valley that we're in. So if the drainage fails, right now there's two culverts that drain the area, the watershed. And if they fail, the spaces would fill up. Robin Lane would have water 7 feet deep, and Iris Lane, northern half of Iris Lane would have water that's 2 feet deep. Not only is it a problem with floodplain, but the people who own property there are burdened by the fact that their property is in a floodplain. I don't think anybody even heard this, knew that this was the case until very recently. And there's a development project proposed on that property that has the fill, they're planning to build on top of the fill. Anyway, if you read what I've distributed, you'll learn the details. I don't think I shouldn't take more time.
I appreciate it.
One thing I would ask, though, is everybody could send an email or a letter to the planning department asking to daylight the creek, because that will eliminate the floodplain. Thank you.
If anybody would like to be more involved with that topic, please get in touch with him. Is your contact information on those flyers, sir? Is your contact information on those flyers?
No, it's not the.
That's right. Would you stick around for a little bit in case anybody had any questions afterwards?
Anyone, I told them I'm happy to get it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir. And if people do have to leave, you're more than welcome. It's not disrespectful to you at this point. Thank you.
I'm Steve Wilson from South Neighborhood, and we have a piece of property at I-5 at Old Prairie Parkway. It used to have a Shell gas station, and that was identified in the 04 comprehensive plan as a neighborhood urban village, which is not a tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3, but it was way down there. But a neighborhood urban village nonetheless. And we're trying to get the attention of the property owner to develop that property in an appropriate way. And the last time we contacted them, they were talking about putting a jack in the box. Fortunately, the gas station stuck around, but now that it's removed. So my question was going to be to the mayor, how do we get a property owner to do the right thing?
That is a very good question.
And we're open to all ideas. We've had committees when the ABC Metal Shredder came into town, we started a subcommittee of the Southfield Neighborhood Association, and that developed into, say, the waterfront. If anybody wants to get involved with any one of these topics, get in touch with your board members, get in touch with me, and we can make something happen. That's how this works. That's how government works.
Thanks, Scott. Talk about IBC, I mean, half the Valley neighborhood. And our mayor referenced 2 council members here in their votes, but they didn't really get a chance to respond, to explain why they voted no. And I'd like to hear from both of those council members about why you guys voted no on the parking minimums, because I think it's important to hear both sides.
Sure. Wow, that's a lot of comments. My name is Mike, I'm your 6th Ward representative. I want to start by saying that myself, the mayor, the other council members, we agree and share values and outlook at 80%. I want to start with that. But there's a 20% where there's a disagreement, and so I'm going to focus on that for a moment, but I wanted to start with the agreement. I'm going to try to be short on this. As was mentioned, this was an across-the-board approach to reforming parking mandates. Basically getting rid of any required parking, you put it in as you see fit. I wanted a more strategic and focused approach. I identified exactly where we had problems and where we wanted growth. We want growth in urban villages. We want more transit-oriented development, which is along corridors. They finally tell us to build these transit corridors. I thought that we should remove the levers that might stand in the way of development where we wanted density. That was one target. The other target is we want affordability. I want that to the moment to ask for to alleviate some affordability. If you heard the mayor's explanation, she basically said, because affordability is such an important issue, we decided to not include affordability in the proposal. The hope is that there will be enough production throughout the market that there'll be kind of a trickle-down effect in other areas. That if there are enough houses that are built at these other levels of affordability, it will really pressure other parts of the market. And there is good research to show that there's a bottling up of people at price factors where they can't move up or can't move around like they used to do traditionally when there's less spring housing supply. So that argument is not ridiculous, but I just think it won't be as powerful as we need to get the benefit we really need. Again, you look at here, Scott, you outlined very well. We know exactly where the need is in affordability. And so I just wanted to focus our efforts more in that area. So I'm going to go back. 80% we agree there was something wrong and outdated and broken. Never was right about how we approach parking. I just wanted to use this moment to be a little bit more strategic and a little bit more focused. And the other area we'll disagree is this idea that this is an interim ordinance. It is, legally speaking. We will go through a process in a year's time, probably ask for an extension, maybe 18 months' time, we'll revisit it. I don't think that's enough time to learn what's going to happen. You're going to get 3, 4, 5, 10 projects permitted, and none of them will be built, or maybe one of them, but we're not going to see how it all plays out. This is an experiment that will play out over years. I will go back to the agreement now. I don't think the sky will fall, but I think we're creating pinch points we might have avoided.
So I'll agree with a lot of what Michael stated. Sorry, we missed this earlier, but I was a little sore from yelling earlier. My good friend, Mr. Legacy, told me not to talk too long, so I think he probably knows me too well. If we've ever watched City Council, you know Michael and I could give a run for each other. I'm going to slightly disagree. I'd say 65% of the time we do agree, but we move the needle based on doing our research and having good arguments to maybe about 80%. So we don't always start out the gate agreeing at 80%, but I think we sometimes things and shift it. This was one of those cases where we did it. I agree with Councilmember Lundquist that if we are really looking at infrastructure, which we don't have enough infrastructure yet to get rid of our vehicles, there's a lot of people in the community that I know that have to cross town, leave town, go back and forth multiple times to go from work. That As we move to a green infrastructure, we're gonna have four wheels and they'll probably be electric. So those four wheels will still need someplace to park. I feel that it's, pretty much it just, I don't want to say that it's, it marginalizes members of our community who are in a lower social and economic status who do need vehicles in order to survive by working multiple jobs. So that's a concern. But until our infrastructure gets to where we need, I want to make sure that it's our urban corridors, our downtown, our urban villages that build up. And if we apply this rule across the entire city, we might see 3-story buildings going in places, but we're not going to see 18-story buildings going in because they're going to build at the lowest possible envelope. And when we talk about saving trees and those, you know, the small little forests that we have in our community, this was not the lesson parking wasn't hooked to that specifically. So we can say by minimizing parking, we might save some of those large trees. In this ordinance, it doesn't spell that out. Hopefully our tree canopy plan will, but it's not there yet. And when you talk about temporary, it's vesting. So the reality is if we get a run, somebody gets a plan in for pie in the sky, something they may want to do, then what they can do is sell that plan and that parcel to a future developer. So they'll be vested anywhere from 3 to 5 years. So we're not going to get the data we need to know whether or not this experiment is successful. I don't believe in trickle-down economics. It doesn't work. Reagan sold that to us a long time ago. Trickle-down housing, I don't predict that's going to work either. The thought is if we build a lot of these at 100, 120% AMI, then people can move in there and then they're going to move out of that lower cost rent, but we know marketplace is always going to maximize as much as you possibly can. I've been pushing for inclusionary zoning for 4 years, and I've lost most of my levels. The state changed the rules, which by right, in all neighborhoods, you can build 4plexes. They got rid of single family zoning. You can build an ADU attached and detached. And so, you know, there was another level that I was hoping. So I was pushing towards maybe you could do a duplex or a triplex, but one of them had to be at 100% AMI, which would be more the workforce housing. So parking was another one of those things that if you're a nonprofit or you're affordable housing, of course, you can get rid of a lot of the parking because you're going to be generally building in urban villages and along the transportation corridors. If you're going to move from those areas, I wanted something for that from the community because we're externalizing the cost of that developer's parking onto the community, so you as a taxpayer will be paying for it. So what do we need most? Affordable housing for those making less than 80% AMI. We don't have developers who build that. During the public hearing, we had, I believe, the gentleman from Boston said, we're not in the business of building affordable housing. We don't do well by that. I want to bring them into the business. So if they're building like they did down in Fairhaven, an additional 30 units because they were able to get rid of parking, then of that, we have to do the math and figure out, could we get 3, could we get 5 at affordable rate, where they're still making additional profit for the effort, but we get something back. We bring them to the table so that we can get what we most need, which is that workforce and affordable housing for those people who are not just our baristas and our cooks, but our police officers, our teachers, our nursing. They can't afford to live here. And when the mayor says we were bold, I'd like to say we need to be bold the other direction and start working on inclusionary zoning and affordable housing.
That was really good. That was really good. Thank you, Todd, for bringing that up. Jane, do you have a moment to talk about the quiet zones? So this is a topic of concern. You haven't heard about the quiet zones. You have heard of the trains, the horns. There's about, 12 crossings, 11 in the city of Bellingham, federally mandated that those trains, when they go through those crossings, have to honk their horns. And I just came back from a trip down in Arizona where a town had their crossings with the infrastructure they made so they didn't have to honk their horns. And it was amazing. I was right next to trains and I couldn't hear them. And they didn't have to honk. It was amazing. So I live nearby the trains. I think a lot of us do. So we've been fighting this. Jane especially has been fighting this for a long time. And she has an update. I hope it's a good one.
Trains, 101, we have 11 crossings in the city and port. We have been divided into 2 zones, a north zone and then a south zone. The south zone includes 2 crossings at Boulevard Park, a pedestrian crossing and the street coming down to Boulevard Park. And then the ferry terminal, there's a private crossing that goes into a boatyard, and what's the third one? Nelson. Right? Train station, thank you. I have a long day. So we've got 2 different zones, and the city has, going back to what Scott was saying, they have to blow the horns. It's a safety measure to alert people to get the heck out of the way if a train is coming. That is a safety reason. To have that not required, there have to be physical barriers so that people cannot get in the way of the train. And we, the taxpayer, not BNSF, has to pay for that. So they have installed fort gates and all sorts of things to prevent people from getting in the way. And that work has been completed for the South Zone for the 2 boulevard crossings. That was done by the city. The 3 at the port are done with the exception of a private crossing. And I was notified today by Ken Bell that the work that they have to do, which is minimal work that has to be done at the private crossing, is scheduled to be completed Friday. Now, once that is done, then the city has to submit to the FRA to get this approval at BNSF, the city, all sorts of authorities have to agree. They've already basically agreed to the plan to actually do the implementation. How long it will take for that approval to come, I don't know. It could be a couple months. This has been going on before we moved here in 2015, other people have been working on this. But the actual physical work of putting in the barriers has been completed, and the work at the port, the private crossing is minimal. So that's the update. The city and the port are working very well and very closely together to get this over the finish line, and hopefully it will be soon. By the time we open our windows for the summer, I'm hoping we can open the damn windows in the summer.
Jane, so are you saying that the south end, once they're done, the south end horns will be able to stop honking, but the north end horns will have to continue?
Right, and the north, I can't remember how many of those crossings are done. I think maybe 3 or 4 done. My husband, my other brain back there. There are 3 that have to be done. Cornwall, if you've ever been down there, that's a very complex crossing. And BNSF would like us to build a bridge for many, many millions of dollars so they can go under at a faster speed. But needless to say, they don't have that. The other thing that's happening is the port is putting a rail spur to the train lines so that they can bring in more ships. So stay tuned for that. We're staying on top of that. We'll keep you posted. But yeah, there's a lot going on. But yes, but once that's done, once it's approved, the train horns will not be required to go unless there is an obstacle on the tracks, and then they will fight for the tracks and then it's hurt.
Thank you, Jane. Jane is an ex-president of South Lund Association. Let's do one more. Is there anything that's a short one? Yes.
I would recommend, I'm very serious right now, consider putting in a CD store. What? CDs.
CDs. So I think we have a couple downtown.
CD players. Now, what I need to say is that people are looking at phones, they're drawing negative facial expressions in their computer base. And if you bring music back over to your CDs, you'll find everyone's smiles will become gradually wider.
Sounds good. Let's get some CD players. I love CDs. Yes, ma'am.
It's a short one bouncing back to parking. My name's Robertson. I was on the Fairhaven Parking Task Force for 3 years. Anybody else in here on that? Oh, you guys missed out. A lot of fun. We, over 3 years, hammered out a plan for Fairhaven for how to alleviate parking issues. And it had stages that were set based on certain triggers that were met regarding how many parking spaces were available. So long process involving property owners, business owners, neighborhood members, transportation commission, all approved by the city council and accepted back, I think in 2017, revisited again in 2019. So stages were set, and this is the Fairhaven core, commercial core area, where it went from free parking to timed but free parking, so 2-hour timed, to meters on the street. And each one of those was a different stage in the parking task force plan. That happened, but the other parts of the plan haven't been implemented, and that has to do with the city looking at additional parking areas as the public spaces currently, or privately owned spaces currently used for parking are being developed. So we've seen several of those lots developed into beautiful new housing structures, love that. And the biggest one that you know is coming is in the pits. Everyone knows where that is, right? There's 80 parking spaces in the pit. And when that goes into development, which is likely this spring sometime, the parking adjacent to that on Mill and 11th will also be eliminated because of construction. So what's not happened is any additional resource for all the people who park there. And that's generally the people who work in Fairhaven. So I'm just looking at it as a crisis that's inevitable with the development of the pit and no additional location for parking being considered, thought about, looked at, or even, I don't know, there's no plan at this point. The church here, Hillcrest, has offered up its parking to some of the Fairhaven merchants, and that's been really wonderful. People haven't really taken advantage of it because it hasn't been a pressure point yet, since all that free parking is still available in the pit. So it's one of the things that's going to become, I think, contentious as there's reduced availability for parking. That means there may be fewer people coming to shop in Fairhaven and use the services of Fairhaven, which means there's going to be less money in taxes going to the city, and that's going to be a pretty awful spiral for the commercial district in Fairhaven. And I don't have an answer because I spent all that time on the parking task force thinking, maybe foolishly, that all the steps would be implemented, and only parts of the steps have been implemented along the way. So,
do you think that's the solution you're looking for?
I think implementation of the plan as it was approved is what I'm looking for.
Sounds pretty easy.
Yeah. That's what I look for.
How will we gain access to that plan? Is it on the city website?
Yeah, if you look for Fairhaven Parking Task Force report, you'll find it under the Planning Commission or under the Planning Department. Yeah, it's an exciting read.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. That is definitely a huge concern. Fairhaven's an amazing place. All right, I think we have kept you long enough this evening. If you have any other concerns, come and talk to me after the meeting. Thank you very much for coming tonight. If you are a Southfield neighbor, would you stick around just for a few moments and we'll have a vote? Thank you, everyone. Actually, what we're going to do first is, because we don't, until recently we had membership roles and we had flags and stuff for voting and all. So I'd like to put forth a motion tonight real quick to take our dues down to 0 and to make our membership purely based on your residence. And whether you're a business owner or a homeowner or a renter, you live or spend time in Southfield, I would like you to become a member of the Southfield Neighborhood Association by right. Does that sound like something that people are willing to think about? Is anybody against that?
I have a question.
Yes.
So the question is, how does it affect the competition?
Thank you for bringing that up.
And I have another question: what other neighborhoods have dues, and why do they have to lose? And another question: history of why dues were put in place for the neighborhood association.
Fantastic. Thank you. All topics that are top of mind, but I forgot about them.
Okay.
It happens. So we used to have costs. I would like to implement having a social hour before a meeting, but we haven't. We used to pay for churches and business locations that we have meetings at. This church, Hillcrest Church, they provide us this location for free. We don't have any costs. The city offers a refund of some of our costs, such as yard signs or Zoom fees, things like that, in surmountable amounts that we would never reach. So we don't need that. Let me try to find the treasurer's report here. All right, so what we have currently is $1,919 in checking and savings that has no expectation for spending. And then we have the Lowell Fund, which is the Lowell Homeless School Fund, where every Christmas and every spring we provide $100 gift certificates to Fred Meyer for every homeless school child that goes to Lowell and any of their siblings that go to middle schools or high schools. And sometimes that's usually in the realm of 8 to 15 children. So $800 to $1,500 twice a year. That's a separate fundraising opportunity that we usually meet. As you can see here, we have $1,200 already, and we need more. Our neighborhood is incredibly generous. So this is why we don't feel we need to keep continuing to take $20 checks, even $1 bills. It's just not something we need, and I would like to make membership more inclusionary, where people just think that and know they can come to these meetings no matter what. They don't have to be members, and they can just show up and be a part of the community and not be June and saying, "Oh, I didn't pay that $1, and I therefore want to go to the meeting." Want them to come, because right now our demographic is very minute. It is white, it is homeowner, and it is elder. I would love to change at least 2 of those. Bellingham, we're not going to change much in the white front. But when we can bring in the younger and the renter, that would make a demographic that could really truly make this neighborhood association special. It's already special. Does that make sense about why I'd like to do this? And then it also makes it so we can vote tonight as a majority because you're all members. I'm going to trust you somewhere in South. All right. Thank you. Can I get a yay vote? Yay. Can I get a nay vote? All right, passes unanimously. Wonderful. All right, that said, now we can take a vote on the board. The board members that were last year, and I'm putting them up for nomination again, are Michael Krzyzewski, and also putting him up for election for MNAC, which is the mayor's Neighborhood Advisory Commission, and he goes and spends time with the mayor and the other MNAC reps from the other 24 neighborhoods and make sure that everyone is in touch with what's happening in neighborhoods. Chris Farkas for treasurer, Tristan Smith for at-large, and I would love Jane White to come back on the board because she has been such a huge asset to us, and I don't ask much. Sound good? It's okay if you don't want to.
Raise your hand if you do.
All right.
Thank you.
Any work to do?
I will not give you any more work to do than I already have. All right, and we're going to vote, if all that sounds good, I'd like to put forth a motion to elect those board members, including myself as president, for the next year. All in favor? All nays? All right, unanimous vote. We are now board members again. Thank you very much for coming out tonight.